Our speaker this morning, our presenter, is Zach Adams. Zach is a graduate of Hope College and has a degree from Michigan State University in educational technology. He was appointed at Hope College to be an instruction specialist supporting the teaching of the Hope College faculty in pretty much mostly the digital technology. So he brings a lot of expertise. We had a lot of fun last week. We welcome a couple people who weren't able to be here last week, and help me welcome Zach again.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate it. Thank you all who are coming back from last week. I also appreciate that. And those of you who are new, today I'll go through kind of an overview of what got talked about last week in preparation for what's going to get talked about today. At your spots, you might notice that you have a paper in front of you. These are guided notes for you to go through for today's session. Or I saw some of you already looking at it. Maybe you were able to answer some of the questions based on your prior knowledge, which is great. I also have on the backside, you'll see that it says discussion points and questions. Those are more questions that maybe might anchor some of your discussions after you leave today, okay? And also might generate new thoughts of what questions you might ask at the end of today's session, right? Yes, I do. I have plenty, and there's several up here. There you go. So if we look at today's agenda, I put in last week's agenda as well. So we're not going to cover everything that's on here in review of part one. I'll go through it pretty quickly, but I wanted that to kind of set up what we're going to do for part two today. So if you were here last week, you might remember I talked about these advancements in artificial intelligence and how they were kind of happening in isolation, right? And they were taking multiple year spans between each one for development to take place. But what we've seen more recently is advancements happening more often, right? Because each new advancement helps other types of technology increase as well. And we also looked at this idea of AI reaching the baseline of human intelligence. And I talked about this artificial general intelligence is when all AI can compete against humans in every discipline and test, right? And experts believe that we're not going to reach that in 5 years, but experts are wrong all the time. Then we talked about this distinction between curation AI and creation AI. Curation AI is the type of AI that we've been seeing for the past couple of years with things like Netflix and Amazon and Google News, right? It will give algorithms ideas of what you should see as a consumer, right? With creation AI was that generative text. So that first introduction of ChatGPT and everyone wondering what's going to happen with writing in the world, right? But as you can tell, each one takes input from us, whether it's a like or a refollow or a additional post, or if it's a direct prompt, us asking it to do something specifically. Then I had the example of podcasts that are created entirely from artificial intelligence. So I gave a demonstration of using a platform called Perplexity, of asking it questions, and it was able to generate a large response, but also point me to resources. And now Perplexity has its daily discovery podcast that gives off important news. Then we transition to this idea of AI in education and what's happening, what apps get used, how is it impacting the teaching and learning, but also how is it impacting the understanding of content and material. Yesterday, I had the privilege of giving a presentation to all the GLCA presidents and provosts and talking to them about AI and its developments and what they should be thinking about in regards to faculty using it for instruction, students using it for learning, but also how are college campuses using it for operations. So facility management to admissions into a college to financial aid packages, how is all of that going to be used? And one thing that we talked about was similar to what we talked about with the news, is a lot of institutions are going to be beholden to the vendor. So whether it's ChatGPT, OpenAI, Amazon Web Services, they'll have to just kind of take the packages that get presented to them. So I wanted them to come up with ideas and questions around harnessing AI, having control of it rather than AI having control of how campuses operate. So we talked a little bit about that. Then we discussed this idea of AI ethics, how it gets embedded into curriculum. There's great resources out there about how businesses should be thinking about AI as well, how to develop it, when to deploy it, and how transparent to be about the models that they're using when it comes to consumer data. And then probably the most engaging part was the activities that we did along with recognizing, was this a human or was this an AI generated image? Was this a video created by someone or was this AI? We looked at a couple of different ways of using AI voices, right? So we're not going to go through those today, but that's kind of how we ended last week's session. And then it prompted you to have lots of questions, which was great. Right, so we looked at videos like this, and we'll explore more videos like this today. So at the end, you had questions, and then I took those questions and I put them into AI and asked it to create a visual for those. And this is what it created. Right. As you can tell, AI is not great at actually producing words and images, right? If you look at that, it looks like gibberish, right? So we're kind of stuck at that still. They're getting better, right? So it could analyze text and be able to put it into text. But one of the questions that got generated last week was when I showed the image of the French Bulldog playing soccer, right? And it had the logo of Manchester United. And the question was, would we think of these as always being like paid promotions? And I was struck by that because when I put the input into ChatGPT asking it to do that, and it actually showed me the logo and the wording wasn't distorted. It didn't catch me off guard. I was like, oh, that's great. It was able to make a French Bulldog playing soccer for Manchester United. But the question got me thinking, are brands or are companies allowing these AI systems to use their logo or use their likeness for promotion? And I don't know the answer. I think it's happening because there's so much data online and it just scrubbed all the images that was available and then reproduced it perfectly. If I were to use that and commercialize that image and ask people to buy it, I would probably get in trouble because I didn't get permission from Manchester United. But it doesn't seem like the AI companies are getting in trouble when they're producing those images for their likeness. So I was struck by that question. But then these were the other questions that you all generated that I didn't have time to answer last week. Right. So I took all those note cards that I was given, I wrote those questions out, and I sat and I thought, right, how can I answer all of these in my time? And I thought I could probably spend a whole session on each one of these individually if I wanted to. Now, I don't have the time to do that, so I'm going to try to group these together in categories and explain my thoughts around these questions. But again, I'm just one person's opinion. My suggestion is to find other expert opinions or those in the industry that might be able to answer these as well, right? I took your questions and I put it into something called a word cloud. I don't know if you've ever seen a word cloud before, but what it does, it counts all the words in those questions, and then it ranks them based on which ones showed up the most often, right? The ones that show up the most often are the biggest on the screen, right? The ones that don't show up as much are the smallest. So as you can tell, AI is the biggest. It was brought up the most often in your questions, which makes sense. But then we have other things like sources and content, AI generated, and stuff like that. The ones that I'll focus on today are these ones that I'm circling in red. This idea of it being intrusive, not having an option whether it's there or not. Do we need it? Why was it made? How do we deal with things that are fake? Can we point them out? Right? The idea of using internet browsers. Which internet browser should you use? Which one are you using? Okay. How does the average person keep up with all the changes? Those were the ideas that a lot of the questions centered on. And when I thought about this, I thought, wow, this is, to me, in my understanding, this is kind of similar to when people asked, why are we going to the moon? Why are we spending all this energy, time, effort? Why are experts working together to go reach this goal that there's so many other things that we should really be focusing on. And so I had to take a second. I went and rewatched JFK's speech at Rice University, and I pulled two clips from it. And one of them is going to center us on the big challenge that we're facing right now. So I'm going to play that clip, and then I'm going to give us time to pause and reflect.
For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole. Despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. No man can fully
Again, I want us to kind of center the idea of like we're kind of in a similar situation with AI, right? We don't really fully comprehend what it can be used for. And we have lots of people working towards that goal, but those goals might be diverging in certain areas and not be centered. And that's the next part that we're going to focus on is like, how can we make this a collaborative effort so that all the best of the best are working towards the same thing and it's not diverging across different sectors of society and dismantling our trust in certain things that are happening. Okay. So then he gets further into the speech. And I focus on, well, what if this wasn't us going to the moon and why we're going to the moon, but what does this mean about why AI is being developed and what it could be used for? And this is probably the part that everyone might remember gets played the most.
hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
All right, so I'm pausing there and I want you to turn to the people around you and maybe just say your initial reaction to that, right? Memory of maybe watching that before and then relating it to, again, this idea of our goal with AI and what we hear around the goal of AI. Okay, so take a second to talk with someone next to you.
Has it?
All right. We're going to bring it back together. So if you can wrap up your conversations. Now, if I was in my class with my students, I would not interrupt because I absolutely love the engagement, the discussion, the volume level that goes to a certain level lets me know that you are listening, you are learning, and now you're contributing into that conversation. I absolutely love that. But I also want everyone to be able to learn from the conversations that you had with the people around you. So if anyone's willing, I'll have Gordon with the microphone be able to come around. Can you maybe share out what is a reflection you had from watching that video or those two clips from JFK's speech about going to the moon and why we're going to the moon in relationship to, okay, why AI? Why reach for this goal of establishing AI?
Tom's first.
I'll jump in. Why not? Tom Robinson. We were just discussing that JFK had a pretty defined goal. We knew where the moon was. We knew how far it was. Where is it going to move? Right? It's going to be there tomorrow. And so we had a pretty good idea of what achievement meant, as an example, right? We're just discussing, I'm still working a bit. And one of the things I do is analyze healthcare data. So when I put AI tools towards a huge database, right? I've got a couple million records of healthcare data. I don't know what the heck I'm asking for because there's too many variables, right? I'm looking at disease state analysis. What does that mean, right? There's 100,000 disease states. So I got to put it in context, age group, location, demographic profiles to kind of train it. And then it's really good because it can tell me things that I didn't know to even ask. But I've got to be very contextual and I've got to be very tailored in how I use that model. So it's a bit different. I guess it's a bit apples and oranges, I guess is my summation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Any other reflections for all the way across?
Diagonally in the room.
Yes.
I was struck by the, I'm Beverly Rano, by the way. I was just struck by the challenge and that he talked a lot about the challenge and how much we would learn about ourselves and about the process.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing. And I believe that we're also doing that as AI is being developed, right? It's the challenge of why is it happening? What problems is it going to solve? But what does it point back at society as being problems? And that kind of goes at my next point that I'll talk about in a second. Any other quick reflections before we move on? Looks like we might have two more.
Some of us were mere children when Kennedy spoke about that, and the moonshot was such a huge deal. There wasn't much risk to us on Earth, but to the astronauts, it was a huge risk, and we all kind of felt for them. They were heroes. But looking at the science that came out of going to the moon, what have we learned? Oh my gosh. We were talking about how much science has advanced since the 60s, probably as much as during the whole entire history of the world. And that's in our lifetime. It's huge. So we can't say we can't use AI because it's scary and we can't leash it. We just have to find out how to be smarter than AI, how to recognize it. I was looking at an article from Nature. Is ChatGPT corrupting peer review? Telltale words hint at AI use. So they were saying 17% of the studies had these words in them. They were hallucinations. So it's scary, but we can't stop it and we need to find a way to use it. So we're standing on the shoulders of Kennedy and those brave people who took us to the moon.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I believe there was one more possible.
The Kennedy administration and most of America was scared out of their pants when Sputnik went up. And I really believe that part of our whole moon mission project was we didn't want somebody else to develop something into a weapon that could threaten all of mankind. I think getting on the front end of AI is probably similar to that.
Mm-hmm. At the end of today's session, I'm going to show another clip that comes out of the Center for Humane Technology. And it very much is centered around this idea of like, we want to be at the forefront and driving the decisions and the stuff that that's happening because we don't want to possibly rely on other groups doing that. So that's the why AI, but then also is the role. And some people have saying the role of AI is a mirror of society. So there's two people that I'm going to highlight here. Tim O'Reilly has a quote that I put up there that AI is a mirror, not a master. And what that might mean is the biases that we see in AI could be the biases that we see in society, right? Because it's scraped all of the internet, and most of the things that are on the internet are written in English. So there's a bias towards English, right? But there also is a bias towards perspectives that get published, right? So we see those things. And when companies decide to subvert bias, we see things like the images that Google put out, where it represents different people throughout history in a different way, right? Which causes problems, historical inaccuracies. There's another great book by Shannon Vailer, The AI Mirror. It's this idea, again, that what AI is showing us could be problematic, but is this telling a different side of society and things that we might not want to engage with, right? I did something similar with DALL-E or ChatGPT. I asked it to talk about what is this idea of an AI mirror, and this is the image that it gave, right? And I don't know if you've seen some new inventions of technology, but there is a mirror that has technology embedded into it to help people work out, right? So again, we're seeing examples of what that might look like and how it's going to be impacting our daily life. But the goal here is to solve challenges. And if you were looking at the paper that I gave you when the very beginning definition, it's talking about AI as a field of computer science dedicated to creating systems that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. These include solving problems. So if you needed that blank, I just gave it to you. Recognizing speech, translating languages, and more, right? But they often don't start as big challenges or big problems. They really often start as just games, right? So you might be familiar with the time that IBM Watson played Jeopardy against Ken Jennings back in 2011, right? And it was amazing that a computer could beat this human that was the best at Jeopardy at the time, and it crushed him, right? It wasn't even close. But from that development, AI playing a game and learning how to answer questions really quickly, right? And with superior accuracy came this partnership with Boston Children's Hospital to help IBM Watson develop ways of diagnosing cancer in kids, right? So a big problem that comes out of first, let's play a game and learn from this game and learn from making patterns and making predictions and then try to diagnose. And that goes into something specific. And we'll talk more about this broad idea of AI and then helping it be very contextual and specific. And then there was one a couple of years ago, DeepMind, which is now owned by Google. They developed an AI to play the game of Go. Does anyone know what Go is? All right, it's like a Asian tile game, right? So you have two different colored tiles, black and white, and your goal is to really own most of the board. And it's thousands of ways that you can come up with playing a piece. So they made an AI to play Go, and they kept on training it over and over, playing itself over and over, playing humans, learning from each other. And then eventually, I believe this was in 2016, it played the best Go player that the world has ever seen, right? And they publicized it and they gave the person interviews, and the human thought it was going to beat the AI the first 3 games, right? And then the human lost in the first 3 games. And he was shocked by what the system could do, right? Because he thought it was just making predictions about moves. But what came out is that it was creating new moves the world has never seen, which was shocking, right? So it wasn't just learning from past games and making predictions, it was creating new moves. And what was struck by me, I showed this documentary to my group of freshman students, is when the human played Go against the system, in the 4th game, he made a move that the commentators called the God move, because it was the only place that he could have possibly gone on the board and no one could have seen it coming. right? So because he played AI, he reached a new level of his gamemanship in the game as well. And so it was just striking to see humans and AI playing together, but reaching new heights because of the competition. That being said, after AlphaGo was created, DeepMind created something called AlphaFold, which helps predict the protein structures, right? And if you know anything about predicting protein structures, it takes a really long time for humans to go through that process to understand like what proteins look like. And AI is now assisting in making the predictions. And there's a contest every year to see which group can get the closest to AlphaFold. But from what I have here is you can tell that these predicting protein structures lead to things like drug discovery, right? Diagnosis, environmental sustainability, and just understanding overall the biological process. So again, we go from AI is playing a game to this big leap in discovery or big leap in problem solving. So that's kind of the transition, what AI does and how it's helping us in the role of AI in society. But how do we make sure it doesn't get in the way of what we think or what we want in our daily lives? So one of the questions that came out on the note card was, are there ways to turn off AI or stop it? And are there internet browsers that are less intrusive? So there are ways to turn it off or stop it, right? One way is to turn it off is just don't go to those programs. Don't go to ChatGPT. Don't go to Google Bard or Gemini. However, they're eventually going to be integrated into some things we use on a daily basis, right? If you've used Gmail, you might notice a predictive text always comes up, right? That's a small version of AI. So those are things that happen on a regular basis. If you use an iPhone, you might get a message that says, hey, it looks like you're about to head home. The traffic is pretty heavy. It's going to take you about 15 minutes. Small versions of AI, those are super helpful. I don't know if they're ways that you would want to turn that off or why you'd want to turn that off, things like that. But to turn them off, it is device specific. So one way is just understanding your device. What does it do? How do you have control of certain settings, right? Another thing that you should be aware of is reading the user agreement. And I know that's not something that anyone really does, right? You scroll past it really quickly and you say, yes, I agree. But taking the time to maybe look through and finding, does it mention anything about artificial intelligence? Does it mention anything about how your data is going to be used, right? The next thing is probably one thing that I'm also learning how to do more often is anytime one of your systems updates, review your account settings because it could switch an account setting that you had on previously, right? When the system updates, it might change all of those to just default settings. So doing that on a regular basis, make sure that you are in control of what your devices are doing and what things, what data is being used, right? Another way is limiting permissions, specifically in social media platforms. So if you're using anything like Facebook or Instagram, or if you have a group chats that you have, right, limiting what things it has access to. I primarily recommend Google because a lot of Google systems are intertwined, right? So if you use Google Maps, well, that data gets pushed for Google search results because it wants to give you information related to your area. So it's going to look at your location to let you know which mire are you closest to, right? So make sure you're limiting or paying attention to those privacy settings. And then this is going to answer another question that's on the sheet here, privacy and AI, which browsers to use. Browsers that help or focus on privacy are things like Firefox or Brave or DuckDuckGo. Have you heard of any of those? DuckDuckGo is a popular one, right? So you can download that on your phone and use that instead of using Safari or using Google. Now, I will say because it's not collecting data on you, the search results might not be exactly what you want because it's not fine tuning and directing you to the most used information, right? So that's why Google search or Safari is really good because it collects a lot of data and can point you to the right thing, where DuckDuckGo or Brave, it might give you results that you don't necessarily want to see at the beginning. So this is an example of how these browsers compare with one another, right? Any Safari users in the room? So that's usually what comes on the iPhone or if you're using a Mac at home or something like that, right? So you can see, well, there's intrusive ads that don't get blocked. You might have to download an ad blocker, that kind of stuff, or it collects some of your data or crosses data between some sites. Sometimes it will say that it's protecting you from that cross trafficking. Chrome users, so anyone using Google Chrome at home, right? So you can see, again, it's a little bit better in some areas, not as great in others. So just being aware of this allows you to know which browser or which search engine that you want to use most often. And maybe you switch it based on what you're doing, right? Maybe you decide, well, for my personal life, I don't want it tracking my data. So I'm going to use something like Brave or Firefox. For my professional life, where I want the best results immediately, maybe you don't have an option, right? At Hope, we use Google. So I use something that's similar to Google Chrome most often, right? So looking at things like this, again, gives you control and lets you know which system you want to use, and then you can go ahead and download those on your devices. I use one called Arc. It's a little bit differently. And in the language, it says that it's Chromium based. So that's basically using Google likeness when it comes to Google search or Chrome, but it doesn't send its data back to Google to help it. Right. So I'm getting the similar results. Right now, you can download this onto Apple devices and Microsoft devices to use. So it is working across different devices. But again, this is the thing that I would try to look for in understanding, how does it use my data? Do I have any control of it? Another question that got asked is this idea of personalized learning, how AI is going to be used in personalized learning. I believe the wording was this idea of like, it could be Khan Academy on steroids, and that's already happening. Khan Academy was one of the first online learning platforms that integrated AI because they saw how important it could be. But there's other platforms like Coursera. That's a lot of things that people might be using to get certified in certain areas or just continue learning about specific things. And then I don't know if anyone in the room has used Duolingo, but that also gets used, right? So you can learn a new language. It's going to recognize your speech and recognize your patterns to either give you harder things to learn from, or maybe change the difficulty. Now, there have been things like this in closed systems. So when I taught in the K-8 environment, we had programs where a student would take an assessment and it would kind of make that their benchmark. And then every time they interacted with the system, they would have to answer questions. But what's different is a student might answer 5 questions, and if they got 2 correct, they would give them similar questions over and over again until they got 5 correct, and then they can move on. Those were just like a bank of questions that the student is going through. What's new with this AI is that it's generative, so it can learn from you, but then it can generate brand new content specific for you as the learner. And that's what's kind of wild about it. It's not going through a bank of questions. It's creating new questions for you to learn from and then to apply yourself. There's also ways that AI gets baked into like online learning platforms. So for example, I'm taking a computer science class through Harvard online, and they have an AI chatbot that helps me learn how to code. And what's nice about that is it doesn't give me the answer. It's really acting as a teacher to tell me, here's where you're wrong in your code. Think about these things that were talked about during the instruction. Or it would ask me a question. What's another way that you might be able to do this Boolean expression in this code, right? So that's really helpful. Where if I went to ChatGPT and said, here's my code, I'm stuck, it would just give me the answer, right? So this is how online learning platforms are using AI to not just give answers, but help be a better teacher. So that's exciting when it comes to personalized learning. But how do these systems work, right? We talked about this idea of they're really broad. If you went to ChatGPT, you could literally ask it any question and it will spit out this long form answer, but it might not pertain directly to your initial prompt, what you were thinking. So you might have to give it more context and say, well, let's focus on this specifically. So when using AI platforms like ChatGPT or Google Bard, most people say, well, give it a very contextualized prompt so that you can focus the information that it's giving you, right? Because it's scanning all of its data and it's trying to figure out what is the best pattern or best prediction based on this prompt. So a lot of times what I tell people to do is give it a persona when you first interact with it. Tell it, you are a grade 8 teacher, and we're going to focus on multiplying and dividing fractions. So now you're limiting what data the program should look at to provide a better response. Okay. This is also where specific or specialized AIs are important. Right? If we wanted a medical diagnosis, we probably just wouldn't go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I have this kind of rash or I'm experiencing these symptoms. What should I do? You would want to go to one that only specializes in medicine. Right? And those things are starting to be developed as well. Or you wouldn't want broad medicine. Maybe you want to focus specifically on a blood disorder that you might know about or something that you're going through or a relative's going through. There's this story, I should have put this in here. There's a story of this mom who her son was experiencing really bad tooth pain. And they went to expert, and they kept on saying, like, I don't really know why your child's experiencing this. Like they shouldn't be. And then what she did is she took all the information that she got from every single expert she went to and every single doctor, and she put it into ChatGPT, and it gave her a result, and it helped cure her kid. Right. So those are amazing things that you can do with ChatGPT, but it took all those experts and their information coming together to help produce a result that was specific. So when it comes to textualized model, this is how it works, right? It gets trained on a lot of stuff, large language models, gets trained on trillions of data sets. And at first, maybe it's only trained on written text, right? So it combs the internet, it scrapes everything from it. Most of the internet is English. So these large language models mostly know English and they can give you good responses. But then you think of natural language processing. Like, okay, well, if I say the word bank, it can mean multiple things. How does the AI know which I'm talking about? Right? So that's that natural language processing. It uses other contexts around that word to identify the meaning. It's like if I teach a kid how to read and they come to a word that they don't understand, and I say, well, what words are around it that are going to give you clues of what this one means? That's exactly what the AI programs are doing when it comes to looking at all the words in your prompt or its understanding. What's great about this is it helps with accuracy and helps with relevance. Does anyone have an Alexa at their home or a Google Assistant, right? Does it ever not understand you? Yeah. Well, they're starting to get better because when you talk to it, every time you talk to it, it's learning how you are pronouncing a word, right? You're giving it contextual understanding. So that's why people who are speaking different languages and they have different Alexas or different Google Assistants, if you go interact with it, it might not understand because it's learning your cadence, your syntax, the way you describe something. So my son is 2 years old. And we have an Alexa in our kitchen because we like to play music when we're cooking and stuff like that. And so we play and we tell it what to do. And then he is trying to say, Alexa, play Ben Rector. But his voice is so small and it can't hear him. And so he gets really angry. But if mom and dad say it just in our natural voice, it will play Ben Rector. So that it's learning. And eventually my son might learn, I just need to be louder, right? But what's great is that it's improving the utility of these devices every day. Now, some people might not want that, and that's where you have the option to opt out by turning off the microphone feature or only interacting with Alexa on your phone. You can do that through the Alexa app and things like that, or Siri. But eventually these systems get better because of this contextual models. So with all that, how is the average person supposed to keep up with all the changes? And I don't really know the answer to this because I'm someone who gets paid to focus on the changes, and it's a lot. It's overwhelming. I subscribe to multiple newsletters and it floods my inbox every day, and I can't possibly read through all of them to see the changes that are happening. But I think there are a couple ways that you can keep up with it without feeling overwhelmed, right? One of the things that I had the privilege to do this past fall was teach a first-year seminar. And the goal of this class, based on the title, was understanding that your life, you are always in perpetual beta. I mean, you're always looking for improvement or learning more and understanding because of the technologies that are surrounding us. So some of the things that we focused in this class was this idea of how does technology impact the future of work? So I wanted my students to understand once you leave Hope after 4 years, the thing you thought you were going to have a job for might not exist, or the skill set that you thought you were getting, you might have to go back and learn more skill sets for the jobs that are there. How does it impact learning? But the one that we talked about the most is how does it impact relationships? And we had 2 big questions that we wanted to focus on that class is what does it mean to be human in a digitized world? And they would talk about things that, how do you know something's human versus how do you know something's not? We talked about the Turing test, but then how does technology impact human flourishing? So how does it support you and your human flourishment? And we read a book called The Inevitable, which I highly recommend. It's at the Hope Library if you are interested. It's by Kevin Kelly. He was the editor of Wired magazine for a really long time, and he basically has been around since the development of the internet, and he helped spur that movement. But he says this in his book: these days, it takes a decade after technology appears to develop a social conscience on what it means and what etiquette we need to tame it. Right? I don't know about you, but I don't think we have a decade to decide based on these first interactions of AI of how do we tame it. So this is where it's really important for us to come together and make decisions. But then he also says, embrace the perpetual, meaning technology, it's going to be different tomorrow and it's going to be different the next day. So by embracing that mindset that's going to be different, you're always kind of knowing, well, I'm not going to master this. I can have at least a little bit better of understanding every time I interact with it. But there are a couple other ways. One other way that you could keep up with the changes is attend workshops like this, right? Have discussions. Hopefully the discussions that I have at the end of this paper will help you ask each other questions and see what does it mean for AI to impact you in your daily life. But you can also subscribe to digital newsletters like the Neuron, Tech Brew, Too Long Didn't Read. That's what the acronym stands for, TLDR, Too Long Didn't Read. Or maybe you're doing that with some of your emails already or your correspondence with people, right? Engage in conversation with industry experts. People keep on calling me an expert. I don't love that term. So I love having these conversations, having other people from Hope College come talk about AI's influence on their discipline specifically would be a good way of doing that. Reading articles from industry experts, right? But then also tap into local resources. So at the Van Wylen Library, we have several books that cover the topic, right? That's where my office is. So if you wanted to come say hi and talk about AI, I'd be happy to do that. But then the Herrick District Library offers courses too, specifically about technology. So those are things that you might tap into. As I was prepping for this presentation, I was looking at the Neuron, which again is that newsletter that comes out every day. And this is what came out today. So Meta is the parent company of Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp. And they just released their free chatbot called Llama 3. Right? So if you were to go to that, you could start asking it questions. But what it also did is it integrated AI into all of its other platforms. So if you have an account with Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, I have a WhatsApp account, you'll see something like this, possibly. So AI is automatically there and it wants you to talk with it. You can turn it off, but you have to go into settings and go into chat and go into advanced and go into click a button to turn off the chat feature of AI. So you do have control, but again, with these updates, it's going to be in your face and you'll have to decide whether you want that or not. Right. So that came out today. So those are the things that I have to focus on. So how do we navigate these challenges? How do we think about these ethical considerations? One of the questions is how do we check if something's AI or not? Right. And these are the things that you could possibly do. But are you going to do this every single time you're looking at a piece of information? No, it's just not possible, right? So the two I want to highlight is understand AI generated content. That's what you're doing today. That's what you did last week, understanding what AI is, how it works, and what it's giving you. But then the next thing is just stay informed about it. But how do you do that without experiencing this cognitive overload of all the information that people are telling you or that you're seeing? My suggestion is become a digital minimalist. So there's a great book, Cal Newport, he writes this book called Digital Minimalism. It's this idea of disconnecting or removing what you have access to on specific devices. I highly recommend this book. He gives really good, insightful tactics of ways that you can stop using this on a regular basis or only use it for specific things, right? Why do we need, I have Netflix on my phone. Why do I have Netflix on my phone, right? Why do I have the Nike app on my phone? It's just going to make me want to buy shoes, right? Why just leave it on my computer, right? So it's steps like that. Remove certain things from certain devices so that you're not using it, right? The next thing is this idea of fact checking, review sources. Where did it come from? How do you trust it? Why should you trust it? Those things might change as you're looking at it over time. But there are also tools that you can use like Originality AI, where you could paste some content into it and it will check to see if it was AI generated or not. And those systems are getting better, but so is AI. So it's kind of this losing battle when you think about it. Read local newspapers to stay informed about what things are changing, and then advocate for better regulation. And we'll go into that. If you wanted to check images or visuals, here are the steps that you should go through, right? Look for things that are inconsistent. And we saw that in example videos or images the other day, right? What details are in it that just don't look right? Right? Are there distortions in the video that shouldn't be there? Right? How could you possibly do a reverse image search or check meta? Yes, exactly. That's a great example, right? So things that get photoshopped, whether that's AI generated Photoshop or people are actually photoshopping things. Right? So we watched this video before, but we're going to watch it really slow. You know this is AI generated. But I want you to find the inaccuracies, the distortions, the things that just don't sit right. And I'll play it a couple times. All right, so I'm going to play it one more time. If you haven't yet looked at the candles, how many flames are coming off candles? Right? So there is no audio to give us some context or help us with some clues. So you have to look at the images, right? You might have noticed on the candles, there's two flames coming off some of them, not possible, right? And then you might have noticed people in the background, they're just moving kind of awkwardly, or if the one girl is waving her hands, her like fingers get distorted. Those are things that you're going to want to look for. But again, we talked about this cognitive overload. How can you possibly do that every single time? And the systems are just going to get better and better. But this is where it is now. So these are the skill sets that you're developing. So if you see an image and you're like, oh, that something about the image looks a little fishy. I don't really believe this is correct, right? Kate Middleton image, for example, you can use it. Technologies to do a reverse image search to see where did it come from originally? Do you trust that source? How often is it showing up online? So these are the steps that you would go through. So on a computer, you would possibly go to images.google.com, put in the image that you're wondering, where did this come from? And it will tell you and show you all the different places it shows up. Right? But you can also do that from your phones. Right? So if you're seeing maybe an ad somewhere, you could take a screenshot of it and do this reverse image search and understand, oh, This is AI generated. It's something that doesn't get put out everywhere. So I put a couple different ways that you can do that, whether you have an Android device or an Apple device. Right, so those are really helpful hints. I'm going to give you access to this presentation at the end so you can look at those steps moving forward. All images have metadata behind them, and we don't always see them, right? We usually just see ours. So this is a photo I took of my son. We went to the Hope baseball game last week. It was a beautiful day. We got to see Hope beat Olivet 11-0, walk-off home run. It was great. So this is an image I took of him. This is his first baseball game, so I had to capture it, of course, right? So after I took the image, I could click this button at the bottom, right? Has anyone clicked that button before? Right, you may have. And then you should see this. This is the metadata of that image. So it tells you what device it was taken with, right? The size of the image, what the image is called, the time it was taken, 4:43 p.m., right? But also the location that I took it. You can do this on your own devices to see, okay, where was I? What were we doing? What time was this taken? And even if people send you an image, you can also check the metadata of it if you put it into your photos. Okay. But what's also new is that it recognized this girl right here was looking at us, and it was wondering, do you know this person? Do you want to tag her in your image to prove maybe that she's real? Right. So kind of like Facebook, you might tag people that are in the same image as you, and it links everyone's accounts and stuff like that. So that's something that I noticed was a little new. Okay. But you can do the same thing with images you have access to or ones that get sent to you, whether it's on your device or if you're using specific programs. There's a website called 10i. So it pulls up. You can paste the URL from where you think the image came from. And it will search where does it come up most often. Or you can just upload one from your computer. It will also do the search. If you're using something like Adobe Photoshop, so possibly what Kate Middleton used to Photoshop her image, you could see the metadata of those images too, right? And again, that will prove if something was AI generated or not, if it has that metadata. So it wouldn't give you results like this. It wouldn't be able to like timestamp it or tell you the device or things like that. Right? And as systems get better, it might be able to say, well, this was made specifically with ChatGPT, or this was made specifically with an other image generative AI. So there is this idea of there should be legislative requirements with using some of these systems, or what are the things that companies need to prove when they unleash them onto the public, right? So there's this push for using something like a nutrition label for AI. Say like, what model is it made out of? What data is being used in creating the outputs? Right? And so this might get put onto company websites, but they don't have to do anything with that right now, right? They're not being forced to do that. It's businesses deciding what ethics that they align with and do they want to be putting this out or not. So my suggestion is advocate for better regulation. Besides companies deciding for themselves how they want to be regulated, how can we decide, right? So MIT has a really good one. Should AI generated content be labeled? What kind of label should it get? We watched that video of the grandma blowing out her birthday candles. Well, it does have a label. It has a watermark in the very bottom right corner. That doesn't seem like enough, right? So should things be a little bit bigger? When you see articles online, in the byline, should it say written by human and AI? That kind of stuff, right? How transparent should companies be? YouTube creator requirements. So anything that you watch on YouTube, YouTube is now forcing people to say if their stuff is AI generated or not. And if they find out that it was AI generated and not labeled correctly, well, they'll take it down, right? But it takes humans to go through that, right? The systems aren't good enough yet to go through it all with AI to determine if it's appropriate or not. And then organizations like the Center for Humane Technology advocate for privacy for people, platform transparency, and accountability for harm. So if a technology gets used in a way that causes harm to people, well, that company should be accountable for that use, right? And right now that kind of gets put on to the person specifically that might have created harm. One of the questions on here is like, how do you protect digital identity, or how do you protect people using images or likeness or your voice? Because with some of these AI systems, it can listen to someone for 3 seconds and be able to replicate their voice, right? And again, those are things that shouldn't be just put out into the public for everyone to be able to use, right? So these are some of the things that are happening. A lot of countries are trying to implement laws, but it takes a long time. It takes a lot of people to make decisions that they all agree with. Companies are the ones that are deciding what regulations they want to have in place or not. And sometimes those companies, those leaders will go to congressional hearings and say, this is what we think should be put on us, right? But those things are moving slowly. But also advocating for yourself and maintaining your personal privacy, using those safe to use browsers, making sure that you're not putting content into the chat that you don't want anyone else to have. Specifically, the EU is probably the one that is most strict about this, right? They have the most protection for its citizens, different than the United Kingdom. They're a little bit behind. Canada has specific ones too, but you'll see a lot of it is regarding personal information, commercial usage of that information, or even finances. The United States, it's lacking in the regulations that have across the federal regulations, but specific states have some, right? We have ones that we've seen for a really long time now, this idea of HIPAA protecting health information. We have protecting children's data. That's why this idea of TikTok being banned and what children's data is being used is so important right now. Also, financial information. So the United States is trying to do this, but again, it's just really slow. And people are having the conversation, should this be a federal regulation, or should it be left up for states to decide? Before I play this clip, this comes from the Center for Humane Technology, and this is a clip called The AI Dilemma. Has anyone seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix? No, okay. So that came out a couple of years ago. It was the idea of how social media impacts our daily routines and how pervasive it is, and how it can really force us to make decisions that maybe we wouldn't have if we didn't see some of that content, and how it should be protected specifically for teens and for kids. Well, the creators of Social Dilemma made this one called the AI Dilemma, and they raised the questions of anyone who creates AI should be responsible for the things that come out of it, right? So we're going to watch a clip of that and talk about the good outweighing the bad, and does the good of AI outweigh the bad?
So important to start thinking about now, because even bigger AI developments are coming. They're going to be coming faster than we think possible. They're going to be coming faster than even those of us who understand exponentials understand. This is why we've called you here. It's this moment of remember that you were in this room when the next like 10xing happens, and then the next 10xing happens after that, so that we do not make the same mistake we made with social media. So I think we'll sort of return to the very beginning of this presentation, which is, with social media, we had a moment before entanglement. Don't you wish you could go back before it was entangled with society, that we did something about it? That is this moment in history right now. We are them, then, now. It is up to us collectively. That when you invent a new technology, it's your responsibility as that technologist to help uncover the new class of responsibilities, create the language, the philosophy, and the laws, because they're not going to happen automatically. That if that tech confers power, it'll start a race, and if we do not coordinate, that race will end in tragedy.
And we know that leaving this presentation, leaving this room, there's going to be this weird snapback effect. That you are going to leave here and you're going to talk to your friends and you're going to read news articles, and it's going to be more about AI art and ChatGPT bots that said this or that. And you're going to be like, what the hell was that presentation I went to even real? Or is any of this even real? And just want you to notice that effect before it happens. Because we noticed it even in working on this. It's hard to wrap your head around where this all goes.
Just speaking very personally, my brain will vacillate. I'll like see everything we're talking about, and then I'll open up Twitter and I will see some cool new set of features. I'm like, where's the harm? Where's the risk? This thing is really cool.
Yeah.
And then I have to walk myself back into seeing the systemic force. So just be really kind with yourselves. That it's going to feel almost like the rest of the world is gaslighting. And people will say, cocktail parties, like, you're crazy. Like, look at all this good stuff it does. And also we are looking at AI safety and bias. So what, show me the harm. Point to me at the harm. It'll be just like social media, where it's very hard for the concrete harm at this specific post, at this specific bad thing to you. Just really take some self-compassion.
We don't know what the answers are. We just wanted to gather you here to start the conversation to talk about it, and for you all to be able to talk to each other. And we're here to try to help coordinate or facilitate whatever other discussions need to happen that we can help make happen. But what we really wanted to do was just create a shared frame of reference for some of the problems, some of the dark side. Just to repeat what Ada said, AI will continue to also create medical discoveries we would never have. It's going to create new things that can eat, microplastics and solve problems in our society. It will keep doing those things. And we are not wanting to take away from the fact that those things will happen. The problem is, if as the ladder gets taller, the downsides of, hey, everybody has a bioweapon in their pocket, these are really, really dangerous concerns. And those dangerous concerns undermine all the other benefits. And so we want to find a solution that's negotiated among the players, and we want to get your help to do it. So we'd love to take questions and to talk with you, and then take them there.
All right. So what he said there at the very end is like, AI will do all these good things, but if it's unleashed and unregulated and anyone can access it, it has the potential to do really bad things, right? And so bad actors exist. People are going to use it for unintended consequences. So there is this discussion that should be happening of who should have access to it, what types of models should they have access to, right? And the ones that aren't released onto the public, when do those get released, right? One of the things that gets brought up a lot is billions of dollars was not put into a system called ChatGPT so that people could cheat on a writing exam, right? And there's part of that that's kind of funny, but billions of dollars are being put into the system where they're being unleashed on people who might not know what to do with it or how to integrate it into their life. But then there's this flip side of like, if they're protected, how much money could just be used to, well, hack into those systems? So billions of dollars are used to create that. Hundreds of millions could be spent to just steal it and then use it for bad things, right? So there is that back and forth of understanding, is it going to outweigh the bad? What good can come of it? Going back to JFK, like why? Because it can do good. And we should hope that it is going to be used for good. And we should also have the conversations about how to make sure it doesn't get used for bad and for harm, right? So if we're looking at our guided notes, we should be on the back side at the bottom where it says discussion points and questions. And one I want you to take a second to think about based on last week's presentation and today's presentation is how can AI impact your personal or professional life in a positive way? Maybe you're recognizing that it already has impacted your personal life in a positive way or the personal life of a relative in a positive way. So I want you to take a second to reflect on that. And then we will open it for discussion and for questions related to last week's presentation or this week's presentation, because I know there might be more questions after today's. All right.
So important to start
All right, we got some questions starting. So hopefully, again, you've been able to reflect for a second about the positivity that AI can have on your personal or professional life. And we'll ask some questions.
I have a question about creativity. You implied in the Khan Institute discussion that it could listen to our questions and come up with novel answers, novel questions for our particular problem, which seems to me involves real creativity. Now, real creativity, the really difficult problem that you also talked about is predicting protein structure, which is something that I've been involved in 50 years ago, solving a structure by X-ray crystallography with a team in Germany. But the rules that the computer uses to solve these problems are the same rules as were sort of developed by getting the results from the crystallography and so on. So in the context of this question about Khan Institute, can the computers really be creative in coming up with new questions? And if so, doesn't that sort of answer the Turing problem?
That's a great question. So I think its creativity can be limited, where if you think about human creativity, it's almost limitless because the possibilities are endless of what we can come up with or the connections we can make, depending on Khan Academy's institute and what contextual model it's using will also limit the level of creativity, right? So if it doesn't have access to the same amount of data that other systems do, it can't meet those, I guess, same creativity metrics. One of the things that I was able to explore during my master's program is this idea of like, you can become more creative. And a lot of people just say, well, I'm not creative. It's just like muscles. You have to exercise and become more creative and recognize and make different patterns and predictions. So some people will say AI can be creative or can lead to me figuring out a different level of creativeness. So I think about that example about AlphaGo. It was creative. It came up with new moves that the world has never seen, but that also led that Go player to be the most creative he has ever been and play a move that no one could have ever predicted or has ever seen to beat the AI. Right. So I think there is a level of creativeness, and it's possibly better than people at some degree, but then people's creativeness can keep on expanding and get better and better. So hopefully that answers you. They can, yeah, but I believe depending on how we regulate those computers and put a limit on them, right? And there could be models and systems that we don't have access to that are just a certain level that we won't know what to do with when they come out. And again, that's a regulation of like, should those be released on the public, or should that only be accessible to industry and to academia for positive uses? Looks like we have one online question.
I just want to relate something that happened, a funny thing that happened to a couple of our virtual participants earlier when you were discussing Alexa and your 2-year-old. And when you said, Alexa, play Ben Rector, it started playing in their house.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question. Maybe this relates to the difference between search engines and AI, but in terms of creativity, is there a way to limit creativity in that? Well, an example I was thinking of was a lawyer doing a brief and asking AI, and the AI generated cases that didn't exist. I think he's suspended or disbarred now. But how can those things be flagged, or should that person have realized it's not a search engine?
So how can those things be flagged?
That if you're asking for, say, legal cases, you don't want it to be creative and make up cases and make up holdings and make up citations.
Yeah, so a couple of different ways is just user knowledge to understand when it does give you something, ways to fact check it, or say only provide cases that are real, right? Rather than making fake case studies that they might be trying to learn from or get examples from. There are different AIs that will pull specific sources. So last week I showcased Perplexity, which is basically an AI chatbot in Google mixed in one. And it will create a response, but then it will also link to where did it get its information from. So then you can go check and be like, well, this came from a certain page on Wikipedia that I don't trust. Maybe I don't trust this whole response, or this came from a random YouTube channel. Is that going to be credible or not? So you're kind of using those skill sets when you learned how to prove if a site was credible or not. Also going to, is this AI credible or not? How often do they hallucinate? And there are metrics to see like which AIs hallucinate the most, which ones hallucinate the least, and then you can decide which one you want to interact with, or ask it all the AIs the exact same question. And if they are all giving you the same response, most likely that's true, but you should still double check and make sure that it is true.
So last week when you talked about the Discovered Daily podcast, you said it's all AI generated, no humans involved. How do you know that's real news?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do I know
How
that's
do you
real?
check it too?
Yeah, so multiple news sources. So are you listening to multiple things? So I believe the New York Times has like a daily news podcast that's like 10 to 15 minutes a day. Are you listening to that and Discover Daily, or are you looking at other things that come on Amazon News, and is it the same stories that are happening? Maybe you don't want to listen to all that and you only want to focus on local news. So like read those local newspapers, or go online to see what news is reported in your area and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would not say trust it. Right, exactly. Just like you are probably watching multiple news channels on TV, possibly to see different perspectives, or seeing are the same stories being covered, and what are the different viewpoints of that story too. Yeah.
I think you've been talking about this, but what I understand is there a policing agency that has set the standards? And the question gets to be, is whose standards are they? And I would like to think that we've kind of come to the point where we say certain things should not be there, but who's making the should?
Right. Yeah, there is no like global policing agency in regards to AI, right? The US is leading AI development, but they're kind of lacking in AI regulation. The EU and the UK are leading in AI regulation. And so, yeah, parties need to come together, but it is that big question. And this is where society should be in the loop when it comes to it. Who gets to be at the table to make those decisions? I don't know what that would look like. And how do we decide who that's going to be? Right? I don't know if I would trust Sam Altman to be on that, as he has multiple investments in a ton of different AI companies. So, yeah. Over here.
Are there any legislators that are working on this kind of thing, or are they so oblivious to it that and don't understand what the impact is that they just shy away from it?
I believe there are legislators. I don't know names specifically. I would hope to think that there is a committee put together to looking at these, but as we know, like things move slowly. And it's only until we put pressure on certain legislators for something to actually change, right? So next time there's an election, go out and vote to make sure that the people who are on the ballot are the ones that pertain to AI regulation, the things that you want to see. And again, that's how we can be involved and set the standard for what we want to have access to as the general public, or what we shouldn't have access to. So I don't know specifically. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen federally. It might be happening more locally. I know local school districts have set their own policies when it comes to AI usage, right? Colleges are now doing that. As I talked about yesterday, I had a presentation in front of 13 GLCA colleges and presidents and provosts for them to start thinking about AI specifically. So it's happening. It just doesn't seem like it's happening at the rate at which we would like to see. But it's because it's changing constantly. It's how do you make a regulation for something that is going to be a little different in 4 or 5 months? Any other questions?
What are some of the different AIs that you meant? You said check multiple AIs. What are some of those?
Yeah, so OpenAI is ChatGPT. So the parent company is called OpenAI. There's one called Claude 3, which is owned by Anthropic, right? And they're all pretty similar. If you're interested, I could pull it up here. One's called Poe, P-O-E, and actually allows you to chat with multiple AIs at one time. And it's up to you whether you want to have free, there's premium versions, right? If you want to actually create an account or not. If you create an account, it's obviously going to collect some amount of data. So there are new ones coming out every single day. The ones that probably get talked about the most are OpenAI, so ChatGPT, Claude 3, which is Anthropic, which is another big one, and then Meta, because of its new release of its free version, Llama 3.
Well, when
Looks
I
like we have a
was,
couple
oh,
more questions possibly.
okay.
That's all right.
Actually, I want to ask the reverse question. So if, let's say a student writes a paper and the instructor says, oh, this is AI generated, how does a student prove that it's not?
That's a great question. And that's something I have in conversation with a lot of faculty is there are programs out there. One program is called Turnitin. It used to be just a plagiarism checker, but now they've added AI detection. And what that system does, any paper that gets added to its system becomes part of its database, and then it will check it against all those other papers, right? Which brings its own ethical question. Should students be supplying the data that they're not getting paid for to supply, right? So things like that are used. There's another one called GTP0, and it will give a rating based on how much AI it's detecting, right? But those systems are flawed and they are biased. And so it will often produce false positives. So in my conversation with faculty, I say, you can use these, but don't rely on that 100% to accuse a student of writing with AI when they possibly didn't, right? So if we have students that are English as a second language, right, they get flagged more often for having written with AI, right? Students that might be neurodivergent or have learning disabilities and have different accommodations, they get flagged more often, right? So there is that. So what I tell them is collect multiple writing samples throughout the semester. So small writing samples, larger ones, and look at them across to see, are you recognizing a pattern in writing? Well, if you're recognizing a pattern, that's probably just that student's writing, whether it's really bad or great. But if there's this, all of a sudden, a big jump in the writing ability, well, that raises some concern. And you should ask them like, hey, how did you write this paper? Did you get any assistance? Did you possibly use an AI writing to provide some of the content from this? Or did you just go to the Klooster Writing Center and meet with a tutor and now it's their voice instead of your voice in your paper, right? So it's more of having a conversation, but that takes time. And right, time is finite. So people might be using those AI systems, but those are lagging all the time, right? They're always one step behind the platforms that people might be using.
There's a lot of concern about how this technology can be used in the election, the upcoming fall election. And there's billions of dollars probably going to be spent by the opposing parties in that election. And there's going to be individuals and organizations that are looking to use AI offensively. And some people will be looking to how to develop it to be used defensively. But I'm wondering if you anticipate a boost in AI development from the upcoming elections.
I don't know if we would be able to look at it and say specifically from the election, would there be a boost in AI development? There's probably going to be a boost in AI usage, right? And deployment of things. The video that I showed about the AI dilemma and the two guys talking about like the good outweighing the bad, One of the people in that video talks about, he believes that 2024 will be the last human election, meaning that we're not voting for, this will be the last time we're voting for a human to be a president, but this will be the last time where we can tell what's human generated campaign ads versus AI generated, right? So 4 years from now, will we be able to tell the difference? So there definitely needs to be some regulation in the use of it. There was a company that got in trouble for using, I believe it was President Biden's voice, it might have been in Vermont or Maine, making calls to people saying, hey, stay home, you don't need to vote today, that kind of thing, right? So there definitely needs to be regulation that puts those companies in check if any of their systems get used for bad things. But yeah, it's going to happen. It's just how quickly can we pass laws and regulations to prevent and protect the election process. Any other questions?
Gordon's old friend, so he gives me one more chance here.
Yeah.
It's been said, in a book that I read about AI, that it's really hyper automation. And so it seems to me that on all these examples, except perhaps the Go one, it's the computer is using stuff that we've told it.
Yeah.
Now in Go, but I guess chess chess would be also. It beats people in chess. Does it come up with really creative things? I mean, it's an abstract question, but
yeah,
what's your opinion on this? Is it really capable of being creative to the extent that we can not know whether we're talking to a computer or a person, which is really Turing test?
Right. So with these new systems, they're becoming multimodal. So now it's no longer I have to type to talk with this, right? I can use my voice, and now it has a voice because it can record other people and come up. So there are times where like you might not recognize who you're talking to, right? You might have that if you call customer service for certain things, like, hey, I want to talk to an actual person here. You may have seen those commercials and like, well, prove you're the person who called me in the first place and not an AI assistant, right? So it will come to a point where we possibly won't be able to tell. And then it comes up to us, like, are there sectors of society where we don't care if we can tell or not? Right? If I'm just trying to get to customer service and it's going to solve my problem, do I necessarily care if I'm talking to a human, as long as it understands what I want to achieve? Right? But there will be times where we do care. Right? I just saw the Meet Vera Stark play last night on the Hope College's campus, and like we do care about live performance, right? We wouldn't all of a sudden want to just see holograms all the time performing stuff. Like we do care about the emotion, the humanity in those things. And so those, I think, will become more important to us rather than things that we don't necessarily care about. If I go into the ticket counter at Southwest, do I care if I'm talking to a person if I'm just trying to get on a plane to go home? I don't know. Possibly not. When it comes to can these systems be creative, the problem is that these systems can hallucinate, so they can hallucinate as many times as they want and create its own data. And now that it's just feeding off its own supply, and it might come to a point where it doesn't know what's true or not because it just kept on feeding on its own thing. And now everything is technically turned into a language. So we can take text, that's a language. We can take audio, turn it into text by transcribing it. That's a language. Data points are its own kind of language. So now that everything is some form of a language, it's just constantly learning and applying itself and learning from itself over and over and over again. So that's why in Go, it played itself more times than a human could play and came up with those, what seemed to be creative moves. So yeah.
That's kind of leads into my question. I'm just curious if that move that the gentleman made to defeat the computer could ever be made again against that computer.
Probably not. It learned from it that one time, right? So then would it take an equally as impressive move the next time? So that gentleman only beat the AI Go one time, right? They played 5 games. AlphaGo beat the human 3 times in a row. The human won in game 4, but lost in game 5. right? So he learned, the AI learned its mistake. Yeah. Yeah. Looks like we have a question online.
Earlier you were talking about how a professor could, or how a student could prove their innocence in their writing. How, like in a legal situation, how could you prove innocence or guilt about something that was AI generated?
I guess I would need like a specific context for that, right? Like if we think about automated driving and you're the person sitting behind the wheel, well, are you at fault or is the AI in the car at fault, right? That is a discussion, right? How does it know what to do in certain scenarios, right? We have the trolley car experiment. How does it decide who to hit or not to hit, right? In that experiment. I think it's contextual based to be able to answer that. But maybe new systems are going to be developed to prove your innocence or not. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm concerned about the hallucinations in AI. Is there some way to detect those and maybe take them out when they are detected? I'm sure somebody must be working on that, but
Yeah, their
that's an
systems are trying to
inherent
become
flaw.
more accurate, right? But for more accuracy, it needs more data. And sometimes with more data means that they're not going to be as transparent to tell us what the data it was trained on to become accurate, right? Right now, I would say just don't rely on one AI to tell you the truth. Put the prompt in several and then check those across each other to make sure it's accurate, or point to the source it's actually coming from. And can you follow the rabbit hole of that source and say, well, this came from something that I believe is credible. I think we have time for possibly one more.
Well,
Or
I'll
not.
take credit for about a minute of getting out of class early. So
If you would like access to my presentation, you can scan the QR code there. I'm also going to be sharing both presentations with HASP so that they can send those out to you so that you can click on some of those hyperlinks that I've embedded into the presentation for you to access more information. But if you ever have any questions, my email is adams@hope.edu. I don't know if I should have told you that or not. I might start getting a lot of questions, but I am happy to answer any questions that you might have, or if you want me to come back and talk more about advancements.
I'd like to just say how this is Zach's first class, and we have a new friend of HASP. Help me thank him.
Thank you. Thank you.